Merci beaucoup. Hi, bonjour, welcome everyone to the 14th edition of the Salon du Livre de Premières Nations. I'm Rachel McCrum, and I'll be hosting the conversation between writers Katherena Vermette and Matthew Tétreault this afternoon, which I'm very excited about. Before I introduce our authors properly, an official word, which must always be said. This activity is co-presented by Kwahiatonhk and the Maison de la littérature as part of the 14th Salon du Livre de Premières Nations. The 2025 edition is brought to you by Hydro-Québec in collaboration with Desjardins, Innergex Renewable Energy, OKT Law, and WKND 91.9 FM. Produced by Kwahiatonhk, this year's event is made possible thanks to the financial support of the Canada Council for the Arts, the Government of Canada, the Government of Québec, the SODEC, the City of Québec, the organisation internationale de la Francophonie and Wendake. That's done. There's like a stunned silence when we say that now. I think we should get some crazy voiceover. Hello, it's lovely to see you. We're going to talk about Métis literature, we're going to talk about the Michif language, we're going to talk about identities in contemporary Canada for all that. But before I do that, I'm going to introduce you both to the audience, just in case they're a little bit less familiar with you. If anybody's wondering, by the way, the accent's Northern Irish. Sometimes I have to place that for people. I'm not from here. But we have Katherena Vermette, is a Michif Red River Métis writer from Treaty 1 territory, the heart of the Métis Nation, Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada. Born in Winnipeg, her Michif roots on her paternal side run deep in St. Boniface, St. Norbert and beyond. Her maternal side is Mennonite from the Altona and Rosenfield area, Treaty 1. I'm going to keep going, Katherena. In 2013, her first book, North End Love Songs, won the Governor's General Award for Poetry. Since then, her work, including 4 novels, most recently Real Ones, published in 2024, 3 collections of poetry, most recently Procession, published in September 2025, work for children and young adults, including picture books and the graphic novel series A Girl Called Echo, and work in film, including the short documentary This River, has won awards and critical accolades across genres, readers and audiences across the world. She holds a Master of Fine Arts from the University of British Columbia and an Honorary Doctor of Letters from the University of Manitoba. Katherena lives with her family in a cranky old house within skipping distance of the temperamental Red River. Please put your hands together and welcome Katherena Vermette. And we have Matthew Tétreault, is Metis and French-Canadian, and French-Canadian from St. Anne, Manitoba. He is the author of What Happened on the Blood Vein, Pemmican Publications 2015, a dark but humorous collection of interrelated short stories set in southeastern Manitoba. Matt holds a PhD in Métis literature and literary history from the University of Alberta, which we will be talking about. And he received a Governor-General's Gold Medal for academic excellence. His dissertation traces the literary history of the Red River Métis. In between academic and creative writing projects, Matt plays guitar, video games, and poker for pocket change. I just have a feeling, having read Hold Your Tongue, that you're good at poker. I don't know if we're going to get on to that, but just something about, yeah. He recently moonlighted as farm boss on his in-laws' ranch in St. Ambroise, where he, his wife, daughter, and his old cat, Major Tom, landed upon their return to Manitoba. Hold Your Tongue, published in 2023, is his first novel, and he lives in Winnipeg. Welcome, please, Matthew Tétreault. How are you both today?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
I'm good, I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing well.
Yeah.
Before we get into the questions, I'd like to know if and how you two know each other, because I feel like your paths must have crossed.
Oh, of course.
Previously. So just give us a sense of your relationship before we jump in here.
I have no memory of first memory. You've just kind of been around.
I think if we go, I remember.
Okay.
You came. I was still a PhD student at the University of Alberta, and you came to give a talk at the Canadian Literature Centre.
Okay.
I think you had just published River Woman.
Yep.
And you talked about having to sift through the colonial bullshit to do the research. And I was like, yes, that's exactly what I feel like. And then I think we met a couple other places, did a reading in Winnipeg, met at ILSA in Winnipeg as well. So kind of bumped into each other at a few different places along the way.
Yeah, for sure. I remember that talk. I had a baby with me. My child traveled with me that year and was always appearing in front of audiences and making much better impression than I was. I love that that's the quote you remember me telling. Out of all
I was
the
like,
things
inspirational.
I could have said. It's true. This work is forever just sifting through and tolerating, absolute bullshit on the page.
Yep.
Yeah. But
I think we can start to unpick that in the next 40 minutes. The reason I'm curious is I was reading and absolutely enthralled by both your books, Hold Your Tongue and Procession, Katherena, your most recent book of poetry. And I did feel that there was so many connections in terms of form, in terms of memory, in terms of fragments coming together to make a whole history, and also in terms of language, and looking particularly at the Michif language. Given that the audience here, and I had to do some research to look into what Michif actually was, I will say that as someone who has good conversational French and appalling professional French, I find it really relaxing to read Michif because I was like, oh, my brain thinks like this. There's sort of half and half. I find the same thing with Akkadian. I find the same thing with anything that sort of mixes these, but I know there is more of a structure. But just to set the tone, I think if we could, you've two definitions of Michif that I'd like you to read for the audience. Matthew, I'm going to give you this to read, and the title says, ask Matthew to read this or give his own version because he knows a lot more about this than your two evenings of internet research.
I like that as a heading.
Humility is important.
So Michif, formally adopted in 2000 as the historical and official language of the Métis Nation, is not simply a blend of French and Nehiyawewen, or Cree. It is its own language, born of the fur trade and the formation of a distinct Métis people. Developed in the early 1800s and spoken widely by bison hunters on the plains, Michif reflects the ethnogenesis of the Métis themselves. Not fully European, not fully First Nation, but fully Métis. Or as Marilyn Dumont says, not half, not lacking, from her poems, The Wintering Words. Michif emerged in the territories now known as Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta, parts of Ontario. I would add North Dakota and Montana as well as part of that territory. During a time when Nakota, Nehiawak, and Anishinaabe communities intermingled with French-speaking voyageurs, their descendants, the Métis, created a language that mirrored their hybrid cultural identity. As Métis linguist Peter Baker describes, Michif weaves Nehiyawewen and French components to form a new independent language, incorporating French nouns, adjectives, and articles alongside Nehiyawewen verbs, syntax, and pronouns. It includes elements of Nehiyawewen, French, English, and Anishinaabemowin, and Saulteaux, but is not limited to any of them. It is a language that could only have been born through the lived experience of the Métis Nation. And I would quickly add that there's actually three.
Please do.
There's three. There's Michif French, there's Michif, like heritage Michif, there's southern Michif, and then northern Michif that have different varieties or dialects of Michif. So,
and looking at this as a formal language, it is a language with its own syntax, with its own grammar, with its own structure. You have to learn Michif. You can't just throw in a bit of French, throw in a bit of English, and then that's not Michif. I think that's the key point, that there's a learning process involved with that, and I would love to get onto that learning process. Before we do that, Katherena, if I could ask you to read your poem.
An alternative definition.
An alternative definition of Michif.
Now that you think you got it down, I'm going to confuse you. That was a really great definition of Michif and how I understand Michif. Definitely something with structure. And this is a poem I wrote trying to describe it in the poetic way. Michif. Grown of parts older than the whole, twined together like braid, worn but new. Made for trade, made to transcend otherness, made apart. To be understood by as many people as possible. Not half, but both. Not both, but own.
Thank you. And with your own then learning of Michif, how did you learn it? What were the opportunities given? Are you learning it? Within, you've both got words. I mean, obviously Hold Your Tongue has a lot of Michif in the book itself. What are the opportunities to learn it as a language for Métis presently in the Métis Nation?
Well, it depends which version of Michif you're talking about, first of all. I think there's more resources for a certain, there's more resources for heritage Michif than there are for French Michif, for instance. And I think French Michif is the one that appears mostly in my collection. And even then, I don't really speak it. I have an ear for it, and I was just, as I was writing it, I was just trying to remember how, you know, these old guys at the restaurant would talk, you know, when they're just sitting around a coffee and bullshitting for 2 hours. You know, just trying to capture the cadence of their stories. So that's kind of how I kind of put it in there. But otherwise, there's a dictionary by these four elders from Saint-Laurent, Michif, Français Michif, Michif French as spoken by the people of Saint-Laurent. So there are some resources for French Michif. And I would love to learn heritage Michif, and it's something that I want to do at one point when I have time. It's the problem.
Let's have time, hey? My resource for heritage Michif is always the Gabriel Dumont Institute has a Michif dictionary, and I like to go in there and kind of piece together something of a Michif. It spells out the French-like words it's like phonetically they're spelt out with more of an accent that sounds English, and I always thought it was an English accent, but it's actually an Ojibwe or a Cree accent, which is a much more, like English has a stronger consonants than French does. That's how, I'm not a linguist, that's just how I explain it in my head. There's lots, I mean, every day there seems to be new resources coming up. Both my adult children have been involved in a Michif language course online that's taught through an organization out of Vancouver, actually. A Michif person's living out there. And I'm blanking on the name, but it's there out there. And she's also a yoga instructor. Her name is Sarah Anne Tourande. So that's how you know she's legit. Her last name is Tourande. That's really how we know we're legit. We just, and then we find out how we're related to one another. That's what we do. And right now, a very exciting thing that's happening in Winnipeg is the Louis Riel school, two school divisions, Louis Riel School Division, which is in the south end of the city, and now the Winnipeg School Division, which is in the north, are both adopting Michif language courses for kids. Louis Riel already has like an immersion program, and Winnipeg is developing it. Yeah. And that's similar to a French immersion program, which there's many in Winnipeg. And there's an Anishinaabemowin immersion program as well. And so now they're trying with Michif, so developing the language teachers, letting kids learn alongside elders, language speakers, and their teachers, and really incorporating the French. So I think it's a heritage that she's going to end up teaching in Winnipeg School Division, but it has those French tie-ins.
Yeah. One of my favorite poems in the book, Katherena, I'm trying to remember the title of it because it's got quite a long title, and you're going to know the one I'm talking about because it's about the relationship to French. Girl at cafe in rain at sunset, smoking cigarette with long marble holder, writing poetry. And you write about the Michif affinity to French, more taught than felt. I'm so French sometimes. And then it ends with French is dead, long live Michif. So there's two things I'm curious. One about your choice not to capitalize French, the word French, but you have capitalized Michif. And just that relationship between French and Michif then for you. Do you speak, because I know Matthew, your first language, French Canadian, but Katherena, your first language, English.
Totally English.
Totally English. And do you,
totally.
Okay, so how is that relationship to French then tied in with it?
Well, the relationship to language in that poem was really just literally the image of a woman smoking at a Parisian cafe. because I went to Paris and, had that whole Paris experience. That you must have, smoke.
So gloriously casual and dismissive.
You must have that. You must smoke 1,000 cigarettes. You must drink too much coffee. You must walk along the river. You must. But part of the reason for Michif there is I grew up speaking what I thought was French with my Franco-Manitoban accent. All my family spoke that, but my family was also Métis. We were always very firmly Métis or Metis, or Michif, or whichever name you want. We knew who we were. We were very proud of that history, and I believed we spoke French. And it wasn't until I sat down and talked with my uncle. He was well into his 80s, and he's like, "No, we spoke Michif." And I'm like, "Oh, that's why they don't understand my accent in Quebec, because it is
Never
different."
mind Paris.
Actually, in France, I can understand, but we have such a country accent, right? And for those of us who speak French from the prairies, and I always thought it was bad French. So my uncle. He spoke Michif, but because they were so in the Francophone community, they called it bad French, or they called it slang. So they actually used the Anishinaabe words and like all the indigenous words. Those were kind of like not a swear word, but like a slang, like a colloquial. Yeah. But it was actually Michif. It was French Michif, and I didn't know that. So it was kind of awesome.
This thing about the language being kind of hidden as something else in a way, and then really it feels like in the last 30 to 40 years that the Métis identity has come to the fore. There's the whole thing about Richard's dad in the book and his relationship to the Métis identity, and the fact that it's to be hidden, you're really to go for white passing when you can with it. And so the language has actually echoed that then in sort of this reclaiming and coming back. How does it feel in the mouth when you speak it?
To speak Michif?
Yeah.
I don't know, it feels right. La Rivière Rouge, parler le Michif, like it just feels right. It feels like I'm speaking like the people that I grew up around. And then when you're talking about like these certain words, there are certain words growing up like shkak for skunk. Like the French word shkak is moufette, right? And so not knowing, like people are like, why are you saying that word like that? Just not knowing. It's just these echoes of Michif. Like when I grew up, Michif was like more of an echo that was still there. Like it wasn't fully present. But there were like, the older people had echoes of it, and so you got little pieces of it. But I started going to school when the Division Scolaire Franco-Manitobain, like the French school division in Manitoba, was formed. So it's like very French from like kindergarten on, and so you learn the French that gets imported from Quebec, and not really the French that your parents and grandparents kind of grew up speaking anymore. So yeah, Michif becomes an echo that you kind of hear in the corner of your
background.
Yeah.
And there's something about that maybe colloquial aspect to it. There's a playful aspect to it. There's a lot of teasing in the book that seems to happen in the Michif with it. I'm curious, what has the reception been like outside Canada, let's say, for this? Because it's reading it again, as I say, it echoed how I speak French, so I was delighted the whole way through. But I did go, if I gave this to someone at home, would they understand this? How's this been playing outside Canada? Do you know?
I have no idea. My assumption is that some people like it and some people will be put off by the challenge of trying to decode, because there's like really 4 different things going on. There's English, French, Franglais, which is a mixture of French and English, and then there's a little bit of French Michif. So there's like 4 different layers. So, and I purposefully wanted it to be a challenge.
That's interesting, because this is not. It's both an easy book. And when I say it's an easy book to read, I don't mean it's an easy book to read. It's compelling and it's charming, and there's a story at the middle of it that is under it that you have to wait to get to, and I cannot spoil it for you because you have to go and read this. But I gasped audibly, and you can ask my partner. I was like, oh, that's what happened. But it is. You have to pay attention. You have to pay attention to it. I think that's what it is. And I'd like to talk about your writing process for this book because you, if I've understood correctly, started with a creative writing master's for this book, wrote the book, but weren't happy with it, so proceeded to go and do a whole PhD. Red River Poetics towards the Métis literary history. Not only that, but the fact that that hadn't really been done before, so you had to go and kind of trace it / not invent it because it existed, but nobody had done the research. Do the whole PhD and then come back and finish the book. Talk to us about that, Matthew.
Well, they say you got to do your research. So that's what I did. No, like I wanted to write a Métis book set in Manitoba, uplifting, Franco Métis kind of experience, because there's less of that. So that's what I wanted to do. And I went to the University of Alberta, which was a really great place to do that because it got me to see the expansiveness of the Métis Nation. It got me to see, Cree Métis people in Alberta, how are we related, and like the connections and everything, and seeing, okay, this is a much bigger nation than I had thought. Growing up in Franco, Manitoba, going to a French school, Luriel is not even positioned as Métis for a lot of the time. He's just positioned as the savior of French language rights in Manitoba. And so, getting my eyes open, like, there's so much bullshit. Thank you for reminding us how to sift through that. And so, I wrote a novel, but the pressure of writing a novel in 1 year as a master's thing, it was, I was not satisfied at all with it. I didn't really know what I was doing, and I wanted to make the connections to what I was learning about the broader history. And so as soon as I finished the MA, I was like, I need to learn more. And so, all right, I want to read everything that, Métis people have written. And then I turned and saw that there was no convenient anthology of, Métis literature that represents 200 years of Métis writing, 250 years of Métis writing. There's been individual work done on individual authors, but nothing really that gathered it all together. And so I set about doing that, putting that together so I have a good broad sense of the different trajectories and the different traditions, people writing in English, people writing in French, the influence of Michif oral stories and orality and all these sorts of things, and getting a sense of that, and then really just being inspired by all these Métis writers, Katherena Vermette included, and then revising my MA thesis into the novel, and then finally getting that out there. I would not recommend writing a dissertation and a novel at the same time, because it's a lot of work.
Yeah. And just something you said there about the traditions of storytelling and oral storytelling within the novel structure as well, because I started to realize that sort of halfway through. Actually, I listened to an interview where you did talk about that halfway through, and I went, because there's one incident. An uncle has a heart attack. That's the sort of core incident at the start of it. And this whole novel is written kind of off that one incident because every story sparks another story. Yeah. And that's when I say you have to pay attention. Yeah. Because there's that fragment. And then this is what I found was really interesting between the two books, was this idea that there is a fragmented history that is pieced together by family members. There's a series of your poems in this, Katherena, I've forgotten the name of the section, but they have years. It spans a period of about 14 years. So there's the family history is pieced together. And so that was something I'd drawn between. Would it be fair to say that fragmentary element leading to the whole is part of that?
I think all cultures have a certain amount of that. There's the popular history, there's the big things that happen in history books, if you are so lucky to have history books written about you. But then it's the in-between parts that really happen between families, between communities, these oral histories, these urban myths or rural myths and legends that, are shared from person to person. And that's almost like the real history. Or no, that is the real history. I think that is what really makes up people. My understanding of Michif history is that so much of our our stories kind of center around the resistances. You know, we had several in the 1800s. Okay, we had 3, but it was a good show. It was a good show. But then a lot of our history seems to end at 1885, when the Northwest Resistance, or the Nouveau Resistance happened. And right after that, there always feels like this lull that happens in, you know, and I'm always forever trying to fill up that lull. And I think we're really, you know, we learn more about our stories around the road allowance era, and around the 70s and 80s, when the Manitoba Métis Federation, all of the politics started coming into the mainstream. You know, we're forever trying to fill in those blanks, because we didn't end in 1885. We really just kind of were just getting started.
I love that, and thank you for giving us the sort of time frame on that. Matthew, thinking of, you know, your anthology and the research that you were doing, what happened in the 200 years? Are there literary stories that we're not just aware of at that time? Are they...
I mean, there's all kinds of stuff. Like, I don't know how far to go down any one rabbit hole, right? I could talk for hours about something.
We've got another 15 minutes. I'll give you a 5-minute rabbit hole.
I'll keep this one short. But just to build off of Katerena's point about after 1885, I mean, 1887, there's the foundation of l'Union nationale Metis Saint-Joseph Manitoba, right? This is an organization formed by relatives of the people who fought in the resistances, like Riel's brothers and sisters and kin and whatnot. You know, and their purpose was to maintain culture and history and language and these sorts of things. And they did a lot of work in the early part of the 20th century. And I write about this in my dissertation, is this discursive resistance, right? In the 1910s and 1920s, they were responding to slurs and denigrations against the Métis in newspapers in Manitoba, across the prairies and beyond. And so that was an attempt, like a literary attempt in a way, to try to set the record straight from the Métis perspective, because everything that was being published was just denigrating the Métis, and so they're trying to push back against that. You know, arguably, perhaps not that successfully because of, you know, where things ended up. But as these people are liberating on that front, there's other folks in Alberta who formed the Métis Association of Alberta, Jim Brady and Malcolm Norris, and then they start advocating for the creation of the Alberta Métis settlements. So there's these different groups of Métis people across the prairies who are working in different ways to do something for the nation, right? Materially, discursively, et cetera. And so there's a lot of history there that I think hasn't yet really been explored in literary fiction, for instance, that I think we need to do at one point. Maybe not I, but you know, someone needs to write that.
I don't know, you're pretty well positioned to do it, Matthew, to be honest.
I think you pretty much wrote yourself into that job, yeah.
Well, the thing is, I don't want to represent a community that I'm not from, right? Like, I think it should be someone who's from a Métis settlement to write that story.
There's a moment in Hold Your Tongue, which I think I can talk about without spoiling anything too much, where the protagonist, Richard, who's, I would say, quite passive throughout the book in a way, and there's an incredible moment towards the end where he recounts the story of his father's grandmother back to his father. I cried. I fully had a moment of and so that element of a new generation being able to research and carry through the stories as well. Are we seeing that now? Are we seeing now with the rise of, you know, with the University of Alberta, and you've got the Métis studies and what you're doing as well? And even when you're saying about the language, it seems like a lot of it is now focused in schools and for the younger generation. How are they reacting to these new stories, to this history, to the language?
I mean, it's hard to, I feel like it's, I always have a hard time with this question because I grew up with in a very political family in this way. So I recognize that as an eternal blessing, that I always knew where I came from and the powerful people I came from. My grandfather was a member of the Union Saint-Joseph in the 30s, and in the 30s they did this amazing thing where they I'm going to get the history things wrong, so that's why I'm saying it carefully. They commissioned an academic from the Université de Montréal, and they wrote what was supposed to be the definitive history, and it's called Hold High Your Heads. Do you know this book? Hold High Your Heads, I forget.
L'histoire de la nation métisse dans l'Ouest canadien by Augustin de Trémonda.
Yes. Yes. I read an English version that was published by the Pemmican. And so it was interrupted because the academic scholar, he died during the process, but it was just one of those amazing examples that I grew up hearing about, and again, like Matthew said, so many of our uncles were such bullshitters. So a lot of my uncovering as an adult was really researching the history and thinking my uncles were exaggerating points that they actually weren't, and I really loved that. So I guess I find, like, with my kids, like I have 2 older kids and 2 younger ones, and all of this is very common to them. Nothing is new to them, so they kind of love knowing who they are and being proud of who they are. And as much as it is always an uncovering, it's also, it's like a foundation that they have, and that I also have, that it's actually really amazing to have.
Just to counterpoint that with like my own experience. So like I'm Métis on my mom's side. We're descended from the Hogue family that lived in St. Charles Parish. We learned that through doing the script research, genealogy research, all this kind of stuff. And my mom didn't grow up with a very firm sense of knowing who she was. And so that scene that you write about is partly like giving back, right? I told my mom to read Jean Tayette's The Northwest is Our Mother. And it took her 2 years to finally read it. And one day I get a phone call. She's like, "Do you know what they did?" Like, yes, that's why I told you to read the book. So it's nice to see that, okay, you can give back to, other, like, not just descendants, but the people who came before you as well.
It's interesting because I think as well you've got the characters of Monique and Becky who are doing a lot of that learning. Monique, did you hear this? Yeah, I fell in love with Monique. Monique's amazing. It's the protagonist's sister, total badass. But I would have a question. How much of this is? I nearly felt that there was like a parable aspect to it. It's a bigger story than it seems to be.
Yeah.
I'm so glad you're nodding when I say that. Can you expand on that? I'll let you talk to that aspect of it.
I mean, I was aiming for like the allegory of the broader nation, right? Through this one particular family story, because one family story will resonate across the nation with many other people's stories, and so just lean into that and make it grounded in the specificity of place. It's very St. Anne. Like people from St. Anne are like, "Thank you for writing about this road." Like it's very St. Anne. But at the same time, I read an excerpt 3 weeks ago in Saskatoon at the Angscott Literary Festival there, and there was someone who grew up around the Saint Louis Batoche area, who grew up with like French Michif, and like they were really touched by like that language in the book. And I was like, wow, I'm glad that it's resonating that way across. Like that's kind of what I wanted to do, is try to be both like layers. It's like very specific, but also speaking to the broader. Which I thought, that's why it took me 7 years to write, maybe. Like, I don't know.
I was going to say it shows, and I don't mean that in a bad way. Obviously, I'm like, there's so much work has gone into this, and it is so layered, and it reveals itself gently in a way as well, which I think is beautiful about it. I wanted to talk a little bit about form and about different forms within this, because Katherena, you've moved between poetry and novels. I also watched This River. And I'm actually interested what the experience of making This River was like for you to be on film with your voice, because if I can say, you'd spoken in earlier interviews about being quite shy, and then This River, you're really out there, and it's so personal and so direct. Can you speak a little bit to that and how the different forms operate for you?
Yeah, that was horrible. This River is an NFB doc that I did 10 years ago. We filmed it 10 years ago last summer. And I somehow got talked into not only having a voiceover, which was hard enough, but then being on camera, and it was a horrible experience.
Oh, sorry.
No, it was brilliant, and it was lovely, and I worked really closely with Kyle, who was my on-camera brother, and really just documenting that story. The whole process of making a documentary is brilliant. I love documentaries and working in documentary as a form, but just being in front of the camera is not something I need to do. This is hard enough, you know.
You were very natural on camera, I have to say. I was like, oh, she's great.
I was so great. I was complete. You have to ignore, like if you know, as introverts doing work like this, and many of us are because we're writers, and you know, we thought we started this job thinking we would just go into a place and write, and then someone said, no, you got to get on stage, which was a bit of a, you know, cheap aside, if you ask me, but like, what the hell?
What a bargain.
What the hell? So you just have to pretend that no one's watching you, and you're just talking, you know, in your little hobbit hole somewhere. It's fine. It's no, there's no camera. It's fine. But for me, I write in multiple genres, and that's mostly just because I like to play so much. I find form-wise, I think everything I write starts in poetry. And I say that not only that's my first form that I wrote. As a young child, I wrote in poetry. And my first foray into professional writing, I really concentrated on poetry because I thought, mistakenly, that it was more accessible than writing long prose, because you know it obviously doesn't take as much time to write a poem. It does. It takes longer to write poems and to kind of harness that idea of poetry. But I really love what poetry gives you as far as every piece has its own rules, and there's a musicality to it and a rhythm. I love playing with, as you say, like things like capital letters, making things that aren't normally capital letters capital versus things that are normally capital. Simple things like that. Poetry gives you such a space to do that. Also like playing with ideas of white space and what is not said, which is something I love to do in poetry, but also in prose. I like to kind of break that around a bit. It kind of bleeds into everything in one way or another.
That interplay. I'm just thinking actually of the title poem Procession, and the way that the form of that on the page leads back to that idea of the fragmentary identity being pieced together. It's a real visual element to that as well, yeah. We have a couple of minutes yet, but I just want to come to Matthew, and with you it's the prose and the academic writing. What's the interplay there? And what are you going to continue with? All of it? Both?
I mean, all of it, yeah. I'm working on turning that dissertation into a monograph, so that should be coming out within the next year or two, probably. And then I translated a lot of like the older Francophone stuff into English, try to make it more accessible, because a lot of Métis people no longer read French, and so try to make it accessible and give back that way. But then, yeah, also writing more fiction, working on another novel. Dip my toes into poetry, maybe. I've got like 1 or 2 terrible poems on my laptop that I work on every now and then.
And just before we finish up, and this has been so rich, all of you, all of you, thank you, but both of you, thank you so much. Are there any younger Métis writers coming up who we should be looking out for as an audience and reading, who are kind of, I feel like, I know it's your first novel, Matthew, but you're already sort of beyond emerging writer at this point, to be honest. So, and Katherena, you've obviously been publishing. So who should we be looking out for? What are the shout-outs for the next generation?
I read this fantastic Métis horror book by Adriana Chartrand 2 years ago, which was really awesome. So I'd recommend people check that one out.
That one's An Ordinary Violence by House Venancy, which is on my to-be-read pile, but I hear great things. Plugging my day job, I work at Simon & Schuster, and we're putting out a book called Wild People Quiet by Tara Garreau in the January, somewhere in there, March, next year. It's a historical fiction about a woman who has lived in southern Saskatchewan, lived as a Michif woman who has passed for white for many years, and set during road allowance era and of the 30s and 40s. I'm really, really excited about that book and Tara's experience.
Okay, just repeat the titles of those again. So it was Adriana
Chartrand, and Ordinary Violence.
No Ordinary Violence.
And Tara Garreau, Wild People Quiet is the amazing title of that one.
These are your next tips for Métis writers. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for being here. Please put your hands together for Katherena and Matthew. That was a whirlwind of insights into Métis language and literature. As ever, thank you for being here. We would ask people not to slow down the authors as they make their way out, as they are now expected next door at the Espace Salon Desjardins at the Morin Centre for signing sessions. But what you should do is go and buy their books and then go and talk to them there. This is a really clever setup. They're not allowed to talk to you on the way out. They have to go and talk to you on the other side. If you haven't seen enough of Katherena, when have we ever? She will be in conversation with Vanessa Bell tomorrow at 4 p.m. Matthew will be up doing signings on Sunday, I think, as well. We'll generally be about. You can pigeonhole him and talk to him. He's interesting. He speaks French too. And for the rest of it, we will see you around. The festival is on till Sunday afternoon. It is chock full of events, readings, conversations, performances, signings, activity, and there seem to be a lot of croissants this year. Thank you for supporting Indigenous literature, and we'll see you again soon.